The unknown donor. The rain poured down over Los Angeles like the sky itself was grieving. On the 11th floor of Mercy Hope Hospital, a small boy named Lucas lay unconscious, his tiny body hooked to tubes and machines that hummed in steady rhythm. His mother, Nina, sat beside the hospital bed, clutching his hand so gently it was as if she feared she might break him. Her eyes were dry, but only because her tears had already run dry the night before. Lucas had a rare blood disorder. He had been in and out of the hospital for nearly half a year, but this time was different. This time his condition had worsened fast, dangerously fast. And now, only one thing could save him: a blood transfusion from a very specific match. But that match had not yet arrived. As nurses moved swiftly in the background, Dr. Ramirez explained to Nina in a calm voice what was happening, but his words barely reached her. "We've exhausted the registry," he had said. "We're broadcasting the request across the West Coast. There's a match somewhere. We just have to find them in time." Those words hung in the room like fog, hopeful, yet helpless. Outside, the hospital, in a quiet waiting room 2 floors down, a man walked in unnoticed. He wore a worn gray hoodie, jeans that had seen better days, and sunglasses that only half concealed his tired but kind eyes. He looked around for a moment, as if uncertain he should be there. But after a brief conversation with the nurse at the desk, he was guided down a hallway and into the donation room. His name wasn't mentioned loudly. He didn't want it to be. In fact, when asked if he wanted to remain anonymous, he simply nodded. "Do you know the patient?" the nurse asked kindly. He paused. "Not really. I just heard someone needed help. I've got the right blood type. Figured I'd show up." The nurse smiled warmly, touched by the simplicity of his answer. "You're a hero, you know that?" He shrugged, his voice quiet. "Not really, just a human being." The donation process began. The man lay back, eyes closed, remembering something. A time years ago, long before fame had ever touched his life. A day when someone had donated blood to save his sister during a critical moment in her battle with leukemia. He never forgot that stranger, never even knew their name. But they saved her, and now he was simply returning the favor to someone else's world. Upstairs, Lucas's vitals began to drop rapidly. Nina called out for the nurse as alarms began beeping faster. Panic filled the room as doctors rushed in. "We need that blood now," Dr. Ramirez shouted into his radio. "It's almost ready," came the reply. 5 more minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like forever. Nina stood outside the room, her body shaking, watching them try to keep her son alive. Down the hallway, the nurse received a call. The blood was ready. She grabbed the cooler and rushed it to the lab, barely catching the elevator in time. And in that moment, as the elevator rose, time seemed to stretch. In one corner of the hospital, a stranger was sipping water after donating part of himself to someone he didn't know. And on another floor, a boy was being pulled back from the edge of death, all because of that unseen act. Keanu Reeves didn't wait around. He stood, quietly thanked the nurse, and left through the back exit without a word. No cameras, no publicists, just silence and rain. As he stepped into the alley behind the hospital, pulling up the hood of his sweatshirt, he whispered softly to himself, "Whoever he is, I hope he grows up to be someone amazing." Meanwhile, the transfusion began. Lucas's pulse stabilized. The doctors exchanged cautious glances. It was working. Not a cure, but a start. A chance. Nina held her breath as her son's eyelids flickered for the first time in days. She rushed to his side, whispering his name through trembling lips, and though Lucas couldn't speak, a single tear slipped down his cheek as if his spirit somehow knew. He had been saved by someone he might never meet. But what Nina didn't know was that the man who had just saved her son wasn't a regular stranger, and someone else in the hospital had just recognized him. A janitor. Old. Quiet. He watched. From the hallway where the stranger had passed, he leaned on his mop, his eyes narrowing as he whispered under his breath, "Was that Keanu Reeves?" Whispers in the hallway. The early morning light broke through the heavy clouds outside. Mercy Hope Hospital, casting a dull silver glow across its cold walls. The city was just beginning to stir, but inside the hospital time moved differently. Here, minutes stretched into eternities, and hope clung to people like breath in winter air. Faint, but still alive. Lucas was still asleep, his small frame, now warmer, stronger than it had been just 12 hours before. His mother Nina had not left his side, her hand never moving from his. She looked tired, but beneath that exhaustion was something else. A quiet miracle blooming behind her weary eyes. For the first time in days, she saw color in her son's face. His fingers moved. The machines beeped in steady rhythm. The blood had worked. Downstairs, in a narrow hallway between the janitor's closet and the staff lounge, an old man with a mop stood frozen in thought. His name was Mr. Calvin. No one paid much attention to him. He had worked in the hospital for over 20 years, always silent, always sweeping. But today, something stirred inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Recognition. He leaned against the wall and closed his eyes, replaying the image of the man in the hoodie. The walk, the shape of the face, the voice. He had seen hundreds of celebrities in his time, but none of them had ever moved the way this one did, like he was trying to disappear in plain sight. And that was what made him certain. It wasn't a guess. It was Keanu Reeves. Yet Calvin said nothing, not at first. Instead, he waited. He swept the same corner 3 times, lost in thought, before finally walking to the nurse's station. Nurse Danica, a young woman with bright eyes and a caffeine addiction, greeted him with a distracted smile. "Morning, Calvin," he nodded. "You saw the man who donated blood for the boy?" She looked up, curious. "Yeah, came in quietly, real humble. Didn't even say his name." "Did he sign anything?" "Just the medical form. He didn't write much, just initials." Calvin blinked slowly. "What initials?" She hesitated, then flipped through a clipboard. "KR," he gave a low whistle. "Figured." Danica leaned in. "Wait, do you think—" Calvin didn't answer. He simply walked away, mumbling, "Kindness don't always come with cameras." Meanwhile, word began to travel through the staff like a quiet breeze. Rumors always found their way around hospitals. Some whispered it was a billionaire who donated the blood. Others thought it was a local hero. And a few, like Calvin, knew exactly who it was but respected the silence. Upstairs, Nina asked to meet the donor. She didn't care if he was famous or unknown. She just wanted to say thank you. She asked Dr. Ramirez, who tried to check the registry, but the donor had already left, signing the form with nothing more than the 2 letters. "He wanted to stay anonymous," the doctor said gently, "but I'm sure he knew. He was saving a life." Nina swallowed back emotion. "I want him to know he didn't just save Lucas, he saved me." Later that day, as the rain cleared and the skies softened, a journalist named Emily Rourke stepped into the hospital lobby. She had been following a quiet tip. A source who claimed Keanu Reeves had been seen in a downtown hospital donating blood without fanfare. She didn't believe it at first. Why would someone like him walk into a place like this without security, without a publicist, without anyone knowing? But something about the whisper intrigued her. She approached the front desk, flashing her badge. "I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to confirm a story about hope." The receptionist blinked, unsure. "You mean about the donor?" "Yes. Can I speak to the boy's mother?" Soon, Nina and Emily sat together in the quiet corner of the family lounge. Nina didn't know who this woman was, only that she asked questions with care, not greed. When Emily asked, "What would you say to the man who saved your son?" Nina didn't hesitate. "I would tell him he gave Lucas a second chance, and that I hope someday he sees what kind of person he saved. Not just a boy, but someone who's going to change the world, maybe even save someone else the way he was saved." Emily's eyes softened. She scribbled something in her notebook and then said quietly, "I think he'd want to hear that." She stood to leave. but paused, reaching into her pocket to pull out a folded note. Someone left this at the front desk, no name, just said to give it to the boy's mother. Nina unfolded it slowly. It read, "We're all connected by moments we may never understand. I was saved once by a stranger too. This is me paying it forward. Tell your son the world still has light in it." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable, and, somewhere across the city, in a small cafe tucked between two bookshops, Keanu Reeves sat quietly with a coffee in hand, staring out the window. He didn't need the world to know what he'd done, but he couldn't stop thinking about that little boy and the tear that fell down his cheek. Something in him whispered, this story wasn't over, and he was right, because that very night, Lucas woke up, and his first word was a name he should have never known. He whispered, Keanu. The boy who remembered Lucas's voice was barely louder than a breath, but it carried through the stillness of the hospital room like a thunderclap. Nina jerked her head up, eyes wide, unsure if she had imagined it. She leaned in, her hand trembling as it brushed the hair from her son's forehead. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Her voice cracked like glass. She hadn't heard him speak in days. Lucas blinked slowly, his lips dry, but the word came again. Faint, unmistakable. Keanu. Nina froze. She hadn't spoken that name, aloud. No one in the room had. She stared at her son in confusion and awe, searching his expression for clarity, but Lucas simply closed his eyes again, like a child drifting off after a dream too big for words. Outside, the machines beeped steadily, yet everything else seemed to go quiet. Later, when she told Dr. Ramirez what Lucas said, he tried to explain it away. Could be something he overheard, maybe in the hallway. Kids pick up everything. But his voice lacked conviction. There was something strange here, something none of them could quite explain. Meanwhile, in the heart of the city, Emily Rourke sat in her apartment, laptop open, fingers hesitating over the keyboard. She had the story of a lifetime, a global icon donating blood anonymously to save a child he didn't know. But something inside her held her back from publishing it. It wasn't just a scoop. It was something purer, something sacred. And, if she exposed it too early, too loudly, it would turn into noise like all the other headlines. So instead she wrote a quiet article, a simple title, "The Man Who Disappeared After Saving a Life." No names, no photographs, only the letter from the hospital, the quote from Nina, and the essence of a man who chose to walk away after giving hope. But that article would change everything. Within 24 hours, the story went viral. Thousands of people shared it, some inspired, some skeptical. Comments flooded in. Many called it fiction. Others swore it was real. One comment stood out, written by someone with no profile picture and no history. "I didn't want anyone to know, but thank you for protecting the silence." Emily stared at it for a long time. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Because she knew. Across town, Keanu sat quietly in his car, reading the article on his phone. He smiled softly, then powered it off and leaned back in the seat. Part of him felt peace. But another part couldn't stop thinking about the boy, about the way he might grow up, never knowing who saved him. Or worse, wondering if he was worth saving. And that thought stayed with him for days. Lucas's recovery was slow but steady. The doctors called it a medical turning point, a sign that his body was finally beginning to accept the treatments. Nina was cautious, but the hope in her voice grew stronger each day. Still, she kept thinking about the note, about the name Lucas whispered. Eventually, curiosity pushed her. She opened her phone, searched Keanu and blood donation, and found the article. As she read, tears filled her eyes. She recognized the quote, her quote, the one about the world still having light. And in that moment, something clicked. She stood up, took a deep breath, and made a decision. She wrote a letter, not an email, not a post, a real letter. She didn't know where to send it, so she addressed it the only way she could think of, to the man who saved my son. If you are who I think you are, thank you. Please meet us. Not for recognition, just for closure. Nina and Lucas, she handed it to Emily, who promised to get it where it needed to go, and she did, through a friend, who passed it to someone in a film studio, who gave it to someone in makeup, who slipped it into a script binder. It moved through hands like a sacred message, until one afternoon, on the set of a small indie film, Keanu opened a binder and found the envelope. No name. No signature. Just the words. Thank you. He stood still for a long moment. The crew around him continued working. Lights were adjusted. Lines were rehearsed. But he heard none of it. His fingers brushed the edge of the letter again, and his heart made a quiet decision. He didn't need the world to know. But Lucas did. And so, without telling anyone, no manager, no assistant, no camera, Keanu drove himself back to Mercy Hope Hospital 2 nights later. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't bring gifts. He brought only himself. And the truth. When Nina answered the knock on the family room door, she froze. Her breath caught. Her heart jumped, and Lucas, half asleep on the couch beside her, opened his eyes and smiled. "I knew it," he whispered. The moment they met, Nina stood frozen at the door, her hand gripping the edge of it like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The hallway behind the man was dimly lit, and for a second she thought maybe her eyes were playing tricks. Maybe exhaustion had conjured this moment, like some beautiful dream meant to soften the long nights. But it wasn't a dream. It was him, standing there in the quiet, wearing the same worn gray hoodie, that same gentle presence. Keanu Reeves. He didn't speak right away. He simply met her eyes with a kind of honesty that didn't need words. And when he finally did speak, his voice was soft, real, without polish or performance. "I got your letter." Nina's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes welled, and she nodded, stepping aside. He walked in slowly, as if he didn't want to break the silence of the space, a space that had held both suffering and healing, fear and hope. Lucas sat up fully now, blinking through sleepy eyes, studying the man before him. He didn't look like the movie star he'd seen in old clips on TV. He looked like someone who'd walked through rain to be here. Someone real. Keanu moved closer and knelt beside the couch. He didn't say, "I'm the one who saved you." He didn't need to. Lucas smiled, and the way he looked at him said everything. He knew. "I had a dream," Lucas said softly, his voice shaky but clear. "You were there. You were holding something bright, and you gave it to me." Keanu didn't flinch. His hand gently touched the boy's, and he smiled, warm and quiet. Maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe it was something that needed to happen. Nina knelt down too, her emotions flooding now that the surreal moment had grounded into something solid. "You gave us more than blood," she said through tears. "You gave him a chance." "I'll never be able to thank you enough." Keanu shook his head. "You already have. He's still here. That's all the thanks I'll ever need." They sat like that for a few minutes, not as strangers anymore, but as people tied together by something greater than coincidence. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about heroism. It was about a boy, a mother, and a man who understood loss too deeply to ignore the pain of another. Keanu turned to Lucas again, his eyes serious now. "You've got something special, kid. You've been through more than most people ever will, and you're still smiling." Lucas nodded. "Because I want to be strong, like you." Keanu chuckled, just barely. "Then promise me something. When you get better, and you will, promise you'll use that strength for others, not to show off, not to prove anything, just to help." Lucas reached out his pinky, small and fragile. "Pinky promise?" Keanu took it gently. "Pinky promise." Nina watched this with her heart full. The moment had rooted itself into her soul. She didn't want to post about it, didn't want to share it with the world. This was theirs, sacred, real. But the impact of this meeting wouldn't stay contained for long. Fate had other plans. Because outside the room, Emily Rourke had returned, not as a reporter, but as a witness. She'd heard about the letter reaching him. She didn't expect him to come. But when she saw the figure walking through the hospital doors that evening, her breath caught. Her instincts screamed to snap a photo, to break the story wide open, but she didn't. Instead, she watched from a distance. Her camera stayed off. Her heart, for once, told her the story didn't belong to the world. Not yet. However, not every secret can stay silent. Down the hall, a volunteer had spotted the man too. She didn't mean to tell anyone, just mentioned it to a friend in passing. But that friend told another. And by morning, whispers had spread beyond the hospital walls. Someone important had been here. Someone who had done something selfless, quietly. Within 24 hours, the world began connecting dots, Reddit threads, Facebook posts, anonymous tips. Soon, one grainy security photo leaked. Not enough to confirm anything, but enough to spark curiosity. The internet buzzed like a hive, desperate to know more. But even as the world speculated, Lucas's condition continued to improve. He began walking again, speaking more, smiling brighter, and every time he looked at his mother, he'd whisper, "I want to be like him." But outside the hospital, someone else was watching, a man with a clipboard, a corporate logo stitched onto his jacket. He had come on behalf of a brand that had once tried and failed to sign Keanu as their ambassador. But now they had a new idea. They didn't care about the boy. They cared about the story, and they were about to make an offer that would test everything Keanu believed in. The price of silence. By the third day, the hospital felt different. It wasn't just the healing of one boy or the quiet visit of a man who changed everything. It was the way the atmosphere had shifted, like the building itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Lucas was stronger now, laughing softly with his mother and even asking for pancakes. The nurses beamed every time they passed his room. The child who had hovered so close to the edge was slowly returning, like spring after a brutal winter. But elsewhere in the city, in a glass tower soaked in neon and ambition, a meeting was taking place behind closed doors. 5 executives sat around a glossy black table, their faces lit by screens and spreadsheets. They weren't talking about medicine or miracles. They were talking about momentum. And at the center of every slide, every pitch, was one name: Keanu Reeves. "We've been trying to get him for years," one man said, adjusting his tie. "He never bites. But now," said the woman beside him, "he gave the public something more valuable than a movie role. He gave them hope. And he did it without even knowing it." They all nodded. They weren't interested in the boy or the donation. They were interested in owning the moment. And they had already sent someone to make an offer. Someone who had just stepped out of an elevator into the cool lobby of a quiet studio lot. Keanu was there, reviewing notes for an upcoming film, surrounded by props and script pages. He was calm, focused, until a man approached him with a smile too polished. "To be sincere, Mr. Reeves," he began, "first let me say how moved we were by what you did. Absolutely incredible. The whole company is inspired." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What company?" The man handed him a card. "A major tech brand. Sleek. International. The kind that used stories to sell everything. We want to partner with you," the man continued. "We're not asking you to say anything. We'll do the storytelling. We just want the rights to use your act of kindness. We'll create a documentary, social media campaigns, maybe even a scholarship fund, all in your name." Keanu looked down at the card, then back at the man. "You want to buy the story?" No, the man chuckled, waving his hands. "We want to share it with the world. Think about the impact you could have if more people knew. This could go global. Viral. Inspirational." Keanu's voice was quiet, firm. "So you want to make kindness profitable?" The man didn't flinch. "We'll donate to the hospital, set up a foundation, all in your control. And the boy, Lucas, we can make him the face of it too. We already have mock-ups of the rollout. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the edge of the room and looked out the window. Cars moved below like ants, lives rushing by, never stopping to breathe. He thought of Lucas, of Nina's letter, of the boy's tiny voice whispering, "Pinky promise," and something in him stiffened. He turned slowly. "Do you know what that little boy asked me to do?" The man blinked. "I'm not sure. He asked me to help people, not sell them an ad campaign." "But imagine how many people you could help with this kind of reach," the man pressed. Keanu walked past him, placed the business card on a table, and left the room without another word. Backs. At the hospital, Lucas was walking down the hallway with Nina holding her hand, when Emily Rourke appeared with a concerned look. She had caught wind of the offer, not from Keanu but from whispers in the industry. "They're going to twist it," she warned. "If they get the rights, they'll turn your son into a symbol, and they won't stop until the world forgets what really happened." Nina frowned. "We don't want fame. We just want peace." Emily nodded. "Then you should know. The story is spreading fast. They already found out Lucas's name. It won't be long before they find you too." Outside the hospital, camera crews had started to gather. A reporter tried to enter, claiming she was doing a heartwarming feature but was turned away by staff. Yet more were coming, drawn by the scent of a headline. Keanu, meanwhile, drove through the night to a place no one expected, a small cabin nestled in the hills, far from noise, far from cameras. He sat at an old desk, pulled out a notebook, and began to write. Not a script, a letter. The next morning, Nina received it, handwritten, no envelope, delivered by a nurse who said only, "He asked me to give you this in person." The letter read, "I never wanted to be part of a story. I only wanted to be part of someone's healing. They're going to chase this because they don't understand quiet things. But you and Lucas, you don't owe the world anything. Keep your peace. Protect your boy. Let this moment stay yours. And if they come for you, I'll be there." Nina pressed the letter to her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from sadness but from the rare kind of gratitude that comes when a stranger becomes a guardian of something sacred. But even as she read those words, a van pulled up outside the hospital. A man stepped out, holding a camera, and Lucas's name was printed on a list in his hand. The light that stayed quiet, the morning the world came knocking. Mercy Hope Hospital no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage. There were vans with satellite dishes parked outside, reporters pressing against the glass doors and flashes going off like fireworks every time a nurse so much as peeked through the lobby. The whispers had become shouts. "The boy saved by Keanu Reeves. Secret blood donor revealed? Hero actor or humble hoax?" Nina stood at the window of Lucas's room, watching the chaos unfold below. She held her son close, his face now healthy, pink with color, his spirit full of quiet joy. He didn't know what all the noise was about. To him, this was just another morning, one where he could finally walk a little farther, laugh a little, louder. But Nina knew the storm was here. The peace they had so carefully built was under siege. And yet, through it all, Keanu Reeves hadn't said a word to the press. He hadn't tweeted, hadn't released a statement. He simply vanished again, like he always did when the noise got too loud. But what no one knew was that he hadn't vanished to hide. He had vanished to protect. In a quiet meeting room at the hospital, Keanu sat across from a lawyer. His eyes were tired but focused. In front of him was a document, a formal statement that transferred all rights to the story to Nina and Lucas. It legally barred any company, publication, or person from using their names, images, or experiences for profit without consent. "You sure about this?" the lawyer asked. "You're walking away from the biggest goodwill moment of the decade." Keanu nodded. "It was never about me, and it still isn't." Meanwhile, Emily Rourke, the journalist who had first protected the story, was on a live talk show being grilled by a host, desperate for a quote. "Come on, Emily," the host pushed. "If you know for sure it was Keanu Reeves, why won't you say it? Isn't that your job?" She looked into the camera with a calm steadiness most journalists didn't know how to fake. No, my job is to tell the truth. And the truth is, some stories are stronger when they stay silent. Not everything belongs on a headline. Back at the hospital, the main doors opened just as the crowd began to shout louder. But it wasn't Keanu walking out. It was Nina holding Lucas's hand, and for the first time, she didn't feel afraid. She stepped forward, the camera zooming in, questions being hurled from every angle. But she raised her hand, just once, and the noise fell into a strange hush. "Thank you for caring about my son," she said, her voice firm and kind. "But this is not a story to sell. This is a story to remember. The man who helped us didn't do it for attention. He did it because it was right. And we're asking you, all of you, let that be enough." Lucas looked up at her, then out at the sea of microphones, and then in the softest voice he added, "He told me to help others when I grow up, so I will." There was a long silence, and then someone in the back, a camera operator, not a reporter, began to clap. Slowly, others followed. Not everyone, but enough. It wasn't a media frenzy after that. It was a release. As if people finally realized they had been chasing something they were never meant to hold. Within the hour, most of the cameras were gone. The reporters stepped back, and for the first time in days, peace returned. Weeks passed. Lucas was released from the hospital. A quiet foundation was formed, not by a corporation, but by a small group of families, doctors, and donors who had read the article and wanted to do something real. It was named the Pinky Promise Fund, a small nod to a moment only 3 people truly understood. As for Keanu, he returned to work, to life. He never spoke publicly about the hospital, or the boy, or the blood. And yet those who had watched closely saw something change in him. His kindness deepened, his presence softened, and when he filmed his next scene, the director noticed something different. "What are you tapping into?" she asked. Keanu just smiled. A quiet promise. Emily Rourke went on to publish a book, Quiet Things, a collection of real stories the world had missed because they were too busy looking in the wrong direction. The first chapter was about a stranger who gave his blood to a child and walked away without asking for thanks. And Lucas, he grew up, he got stronger, and every year on the same day, he sent a letter with no return address. Always the same note. "Thank you for the light. I still carry it." And somewhere, usually in a city, sometimes in a village, a man would find that letter waiting, and he'd smile. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones no one ever tells out loud.